All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Metrictank Public Community Call. Thank you for joining us. We don't really have any announcements this month, but I would like to talk about something that's interesting, and it's about basically startup times with Metrictank instances that have been running for a long time. And I don't necessarily mean large instances. Uh, so we have a tool in Metrictank called MT Index Prune, and we've created a job that we run internally from this tool that basically just takes all of the old metrics from the index and moves them into an archive table. So I'll give an example without using any names. We had one instance that has been running for a long time, and it's small. It's like what's their ingest is on the measure of low kilohertz, right? It's a very small instance. Their query load is small, but their startup times were taking a bit over an hour. Why is that, you ask? Because when you start Metrictank, it actually loads the entire index, right? And then it prunes out the old entries. So we needed to do something about this because it was becoming a concern. Um, so what we did was we launched an MT index prune job. Now, I will say it only works for Cassandra right now. So if you're using another backend store, it's not going to work. We'll probably add functionality for that if we get a chance. But for right now, it's just Cassandra. So a couple of lessons learned there. First off, so the active series on this instance is around 1.2 million. I think something like that. Right? It's small. But we pruned out 58 million. So that's a lot. And what happened was with the pruning works fine. So it does exactly what it's supposed to do. You do need to dedicate a good amount of memory to that job that's going to run. Otherwise, it will OOM kill, which isn't the end of the world, but it's kind of annoying. Now, there's a dry run option you can use with the tool that will actually let you see what it's going to look like, so you can adjust. You can do it. You could change it to do one partition at a time, or just make it smaller in general. Anyway, so what happened was we ended up archiving about 58 million series, and then I went to restart the instance, and it was failing to come up because the Cassandra reads were timing out. Why were they timing out? Because the default grace period for Cassandra for tombstones is 10 days. So that means with 58 million tombstones, Cassandra can't process the query. There's also a couple of threshold settings. So we were hitting the threshold. The options there are increase the threshold, which is not a good idea with 58 million or so tombstones, right? Even though it was about 7 million, I think it's about 7 million per partition, something like that. Even so, that's not going to work either. So what we ended up having to do was lower the grace period to 300 seconds and then force compactions in order for the tombstones to get removed. After that, it was fine. So that was kind of the lesson learned. I'm still figuring out a good workflow for that, especially if you're pruning a lot of series. Now, I guess my advice would be this. If you're setting up a new Metrictank cluster, enable a pruning job. Just do it right from the start, and you'll probably never run into this problem unless your churn is really high, which in that case, you might want to rethink what you're doing anyway. So I would say enable a pruning job from the start, and then the 10-day limit won't matter. Or you could change that down to about 5 days. That's really a Cassandra operator problem, but I think 5 days is pretty suitable for small to medium-sized Cassandra clusters. And then you can run that job once a week, and you're fine. But anyway, yeah, I just thought that was a really cool thing, and I wanted to bring it up. And I was wondering if you use that or how you handle that, because it'll I don't know if you do or don't, but it drastically reduces startup time. So we went from well over an hour, I think an hour and 15 minutes or so, to 11 minutes. And the other thing that it does, so when we're dealing with GKE, it changes the amount of memory required when it starts up also, because it doesn't have to load the entire index by a lot. So when you're doing your requests, right, if you're not accounting for that initial burst of memory, that can be a problem. And if you are accounting for it, that's a problem too. So it's better to just not have to worry about it. Any questions, thoughts on that?
I can just chime in that the index prune job is pretty effective for us too. I think when we first started using it, when it was first created, it took 15 to 20 minutes just to load in the time series per instance, and now we're down to about 5 minutes consistently. It's not growing over time or anything like that, and a lot of that seems to be actually indexing all of our tags, not even the Cassandra query anymore.
Yeah, that's cool. I'm always looking for ways to improve it. But yeah, the workflow still isn't good for the initial burst anyway. If you've had long running instances, it's just a very manual process, which I'm going to embark on next week. That's all I had on that. In other news, I plan on over the next 3 or 4 weeks implementing as many graphite functions as I can in Metrictank, starting with the most commonly used one. There's a list of about 10 that we have seen anyway. So that you should see some PRs coming in for that pretty soon. Let's see how it goes. Let's see. Yeah, so those are all the topics that I had planned. Does anyone have any questions, issues, concerns, comments? Has anyone run into anything recently that they feel needs to be discussed, or the focus of development or the path that we're taking?
We had an outage at Bloomberg with Metrictank a couple weeks ago, maybe 3 weeks ago, where basically one particular user was issuing a large number of very expensive index requests, basically, that would acquire the read lock for 15 seconds or something like that. At the same time that this was going on, if we had to acquire the write lock elsewhere in the index, we blocked all of the reads from even starting until that expensive read completed. We ended up luckily having a lot of logging and auditing around the query, so we were able to find the user and say, like, hey, let's work together on improving this query, because the query was just unnecessarily expensive. But the reality of the situation that a single long, well, probably not a single one, but in the worst case scenario, a single long read request can block hundreds of otherwise very cheap read requests from executing. And it could also block ingest, which causes problem that, we ended up having, in the worst case with the particular user, I think was like 37 seconds that his query was blocking ingest. And when it became unblocked, we had simultaneously hundreds of read requests that had queued up, plus 37 seconds worth of data points that tried to get ingested roughly at the same time. And for 2 minutes, Metrictank was just unresponsive because it was just doing all of this work and other queries were timing out. But luckily, it also advertised itself as unavailable. So eventually, it recovered just fine once the queries stopped coming in. But what we did was we implemented some changes to the index locking to not block the ingest path. We'll still block incoming read queries. And that's been pretty effective. We tested it with just basically taking the queries that were the problem at that rate, and we like tripled it and went nuts basically. And it did, as one would expect, the fast queries were considerably slower during this time period, but the ingests kept coming through, which was very, very promising.
Did you have a PR open for that, right?
I have like a work in progress one. I kind of just want to see, if get some more eyes on it and get an idea if this is worth, moving forward. But it's worked very well for us. I also opened an internal ticket for our deployment to evaluate the partition memory index, which I think in our
So
case might help, but it might also use a lot more memory because of the postings list and the reverse index that needs to be built up. So it might be a trade-off that we have to really experiment with.
yeah, there's overhead in that, and you might not get the performance you want because you might. It depends. Yeah, it really depends. I wish you luck in your testing, though. Let me know if I can help.
Yeah, I think just from my evaluation of reading the code, it looks like it'll be very dependent on the tag index that and how it's set up for each instance. Because if it ends up that you have to repeat a lot of tag keys and values, might not be that helpful. But we have a very distributed, so each partition is almost exactly the same size in our setup, so it might work out pretty nicely. It might just end up being too much extra memory. We don't know.
Yeah. I'll take a look at the work in progress too. So I know Moto and I thought about this problem maybe a year ago. I don't remember what the conclusion was off the top of my head. Or was that at the meetup, Florian? Did we discuss that?
I think he had a PR up even his experiments going, but never got merged in because he wasn't never finished it. I think.
Maybe. Yeah,
Is
but
that it?
there, like, what? So what's the strategy that you're going with for that? Are you releasing? Are you block? Like, are you doing a time slice thing where you queue it and then reads only get so much, and then you switch back to writes, and then you go back to the reads, or something like that?
I did think about that strategy, but that's a much larger change. You'd have to evaluate the lock safety and the re-entry possibility. So all of our functions would now have to be re-entrant, and they're not necessarily, right? Some of these things require that, or are assuming that the index is not going to change the entire time they're acting, and they don't even have the lock. They're just kicked off by something that does have the lock. So it becomes really difficult to. It would be a big refactor, and possibly would require some other partitioning of the query. What I
Yeah.
ended up doing was just there's now two read locks or two read write locks. One is what I call the high priority one, and that needs to be acquired for ingest. The low priority needs to acquire both locks in order. And so what we see, and when you want to write lock, you also have to acquire both locks in order. So the first write lock will be blocked on the low priority lock as long as there is a read request, a low priority request being processed. And that'll block all new low priority requests from coming in. But new high priority requests will not be blocked because they're not going to try to acquire the low priority lock. They'll only acquire the high priority lock.
So ingest.
Ingest, yeah. Right now, the only high priority thing is add and update, and there is possibility that we could evaluate or analyze a query and say this is a really fast one. This could just go forward if everything else is blocked. But right now I didn't do that. I just said everything else is low priority and will get blocked on a long acquisition.
We thought about that also. So I guess the problem you'll run into with that particular strategy is if there is one bad query that takes 30 seconds, you're still blocking until that's done, right?
Yeah, but it doesn't block ingest, which was the big problem for us because it was actually causing a lot of 503s to make it back. But with speculative execution, we actually can just hit another instance, and mostly queries aren't any slower during these issues, except that they can't now speculative execute in both directions. They only can go to the one that's not blocked, or if both of them are blocked, you're kind of.
Would there be sync issues with that though if you're running a query? I guess not. I'm just trying to think through it. Like if you're ingesting data as part of the query that you're trying to return. Like if you're ingesting series and you're running a query, you're saying they're both running at the same time now?
Which?
You basically don't block ingest for queries?
We might have to. So there's the existing scenario today is you don't acquire a write lock unless you need to add something to the index. We use atomics to update the last seen time for everything else. But we're also using the write queue that exists in the memory index to batch up any updates and acquire the right lock a single time every 30 seconds or something like that, rather than acquiring the right lock for every new. And that's okay because we've said any new series, if they don't show up for 30 seconds after they first exist, that's fine. We're totally okay with that.
Okay.
As long
Yeah,
as
that's what I
the
was.
existing series
That's
stay
what I was
open.
driving at, was that the delay. But that makes sense. Yeah, I personally don't care either about that. I don't know. Some people might, I guess.
Well, the right queue is optional. If you don't use the right queue, it's going to be basically the same behavior as today, with with the priority locking. There won't be any change because the right will still need to block both things.
Yeah.
So
Cool. Well, yeah, I'll definitely go take a look at it, and then I'll try to find my notes from. I thought we'd come up with a couple of different options, but I'm not thinking of them right now. Or maybe we just discussed coming up with options and never did.
yeah, I think ultimately like a great solution would be time slicing, but it would be much more complex, I imagine, or even short circuiting reads that are too long and saying we'll restart this read after a write because we don't want to block everything else up for now.
Yeah, or like you said, possibly So I know we talked about evaluating incoming queries to try to attach cost values to them, but that ended up being a pretty complicated endeavor also. And unfortunately, it's really hard to determine how expensive a query is going to be unless you've already run it, right? And then then you have a good idea, kind of, but you don't know what else was going on at the time. So that's why that path is hard to evaluate also. So you could have 50 incoming queries, and they're like one of them gets blocked by some long query, and then it might affect the cost evaluation of the other ones as they're waiting to process, or some scenario like that. So it kind of gets a little bit tricky. But
I missed the first part of your explanation. Did you already deploy the priority lock in your environment?
Yeah, we've had it running for a few weeks now.
Oh, cool. And did you see improvements?
Yeah, it's been noticeably better in terms of like the number of 503s. We mostly have stopped the bad queries that had caused the outage in the first place, but we did spin up a bunch of really bad queries that were much worse than the original problem to make sure it would be effective, and it was very promising results there.
Sounds great.
We also, as part of I can't remember if I pushed the whole thing, but we added a lot of logging around the lock acquisition times and the lock hold times, which has been really nice for really getting an idea of which queries are holding the lock for a very long time. But I don't know if that would necessarily make it into the full solution, the long-term solution.
Well, maybe not logging, but at least metrics would be useful.
Yeah, for us, the logging is actually, I think, probably the most useful part because it includes the query that is really slow.
Right.
Except for the the index add, where a metric would be fine for that because you just say we're adding metrics, or adding stuff to the index. There's no variance there except for maybe the number of things that's being added.
that's interesting. Yeah, I look forward to looking at the PR.
Yeah, me too. Sorry, I didn't get to it yet. Did you already talk about the index archiver?
Yes.
Okay.
I think he's saying they've been running it and it works well.
Cool.
Yeah.
You didn't have those issues with the tombstones. Did you talk about that, Robert?
Yeah. Okay. No, you guys didn't run into those issues, right?
No, because I think we had actually manually pruned a few times before the index printer existed. Sort of a much more dangerous, much more ad hoc version of the tool. So because we had been seeing that it was getting longer and longer, and we're just like, all right, we'll get to this eventually. I think at one point we actually just trashed the whole index table and recreated it from scratch, just being like, it'll create itself back up pretty quick. So we didn't actually have that problem. We also just do one partition at a time. So it's the
what do you, for pruning or archiving?
Yeah.
Ah, okay. Yeah, I think that's what I'm probably going to do now as well. I did not know that when I ran the first job, and it was a big one.
Yeah. Yeah.
Let's see. That's cool. Oh yeah, I was saying that I'm going to be implementing a bunch of graphite functions now soon also, in case you missed it there.
It'd be
Well,
interesting.
maybe we should coordinate.
Yeah, I was gonna talk to you at some point anyway, to see if you guys were working on anything so that I shouldn't and focus on other things, or okay.
At Bloomberg, you mean? Me?
Yeah.
Yeah, no, we're pretty much done with functions. We're down. Our
Okay.
proxy percentage is like 0.15, so we're pretty happy with that. And we don't, we also had a whole bunch of the uncovered when we implement functions, because now new things are being run natively, and as the functions get more complex, the corner cases and scenarios get more interesting, which we found with all of the like consolidation functions. Like the flurry of issues I put in a month or so ago was all because just these queries had been being issued, but none of them were being handled natively. And as soon as we implemented something, users are like, "Whoa, why is my dashboard breaking all of a sudden?" And we're like, "Well,
Because Python was silently ignoring it."
yeah, or Grafana was doing something else and it was working just fine, but maybe your query is a little weird and you should probably not be doing that." But yeah, so we're basically like, we're totally fine with now, spot implementing the functions, but you guys have different usage, different goals.
Yeah, I'm gonna start with the list of the top used ones that we see, and then just work my way down. Some of them, I was looking at them. Some of them are really weird. Some of the graphite functions, I don't know who uses them, if anyone uses them at all ever. There's like a cacti something or another. I don't know. It's interesting.
But some of them I think we don't need to implement. Like some of them basically just affect how data gets rendered, right? There's one, for example, for making pie charts that doesn't make sense in Metrictank.
Yeah. There's I think for the list that we came up with, we looked at the dashboards that were using some of these functions and it was just like, why are you using this function? But it's easier. It was so many dashboards that it was just easier to implement the function than to go fix them all.
All right. I thought my printing talk would take a little bit longer. So I'm going to find something else.
From the size that matters, just the quality.
If anyone else has anything else, so feel free to chime in. Oh, I know the other thing I wanted to discuss. So I think I brought this up in the last community call, but we would like to expose more internal data to operators of Metrictank. So I opened a ticket, and I was wondering what you guys think about it. It's issue 1839, which is, I'll put it in chat. There. So that issue. I'd like to actually do that because it's for us anyway, as operators of Metrictank, it's a recurring theme that whenever we need certain data, like say, looking at the index, the live state of the index, as opposed to pulling it from the store, we never have these endpoints available. And then it's a kind of a quickly solved problem, but it takes a lot of manual work. It's usually like a day or two. And then we go back to, okay, well, maybe we don't need to implement it because it might take some time. But it's come up now like 3 or 4 times at least that I can think of. So we would like to actually do this at some point. And I was trying to figure out what other things we might want to expose. So the main one for me is querying the live index to see either by M key or by string series name to get the information back on that specific series, or the metric definition back, right? So we know what the interval is currently, and then we can, if we're having issues with intervals, that's been a common theme. So I was wondering what other data, though, would be useful to expose to an operator. So feel free to comment on that ticket and just put whatever on there. And also, I wasn't sure about the name admin or ops. I don't think admin's right. Maybe ops is better. But I don't know, either way.
I definitely like the idea of being able to see the metric definitions as they are in memory.
I think being able to use a tag query would be nice too. Obviously, series name is kind of annoying with tags because it ends up being this giant semicolon delimited thing that order sort of matters.
I would definitely implement it for both the hierarchical index and the tag index.
The partition number probably would be useful. I think that's in there already.
Are you using the?
Yeah.
I mean the Kafka partition.
The partition.
Yeah.
It is the Kafka partition, but throughout the rest of the process, it's just called partition.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah, and with all that data, we could actually so there's already that MT keygen or something. There's a tool in there where you can feed it in data, and it'll give you back all of the information that would have been generated if it had been ingested in the Metrictank. So we could probably just run it through that code path and supply that back from the endpoint as well.
Yeah, because we generate our M keys a little bit differently than some of the other tools that generate M keys from a series, and we actually have our own tool that takes a series name and gives us back a small Cassandra query, so we can query the index and get all the data out of the metric index table. But it would be much nicer to be able to just give a series expression to Metrictank and say, give me that information without me having to go through all these hoops.
Yeah, so I'm I don't know.
I think especially when using Bigtable, this feature is even more useful, because with Bigtable, it's less easy to just query the metric definition, because strings are stored as byte slices and you need to manually convert them.
So I like the idea of M key and series name. I thought about patterns and doing matching and whatever, but my concern there is the strain it might put. That's like, you could be unintentionally, I mean, there would have to be limits also on that, I guess. So it couldn't be abused to lock the system up. You can imagine like a really expensive query, just like I guess you could do now, right?
I could never imagine a really expensive index query. I don't know what that even looks like. No, yeah, but the point is there's absolutely no short circuiting pretty much for any of these query expressions right now, and this is an ops only endpoint, so I wouldn't put too much restriction there if there's no restriction for like average Joe user at a Grafana dashboard.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, they won't be able to access it. You'll have to have, I guess. Well, I guess we should think about access patterns. I didn't plan on exposing it anyway externally. It would only be for people, I guess, with access to the pods. I don't know. I need to think about it a little bit. But yeah, that's a good point. So if an operator is going to break it, then they should be fixing it too, I guess.
Well, they should know better. But I mean, ultimately, it would be nice to have these kind of circuit breakers built into the regular system too. So, but I would say before putting it in the ops, it would make sense to put it elsewhere.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, good point. Yeah, I think anyway. I'm pretty excited about that too. That was one of the things I wanted to work on. So yeah, if you guys think of any other information that you would like exposed there, or any other patterns that you would like available for use on the endpoints, please just.
One thing, I'll put it in the ticket too. But one thing that maybe you could tell me whether this is silly or not is being able to see what data is in the cache for a particular series, because a lot of times we get users that are like, when I refresh, I get 2 different results. And sometimes we see it's like, all right, when we clear the cache, everything gets better again. And it's like some weird thing got cached into the chunk cache.
The chunk cache? Yeah.
Yeah.
I actually think that's also a very good idea. I haven't thought about how practical the implementation is on that.
Yeah.
I imagine it's fine. Should be basically the same. But yeah, maybe I don't know, you think returning data from the cache or stats about what is cached?
Time ranges, yeah. But I think the problem might be that the key that's used in the cache, I don't think is just the M key. It's like doesn't include the month index or whatever stuff. I'm not sure if there's a direct lookup. I don't know. I'd have to look at the code, but
yeah,
I don't remember
in a
either.
while.
Just a
But
thought.
that's interesting what you just described. We have recently seen a similar problem where some queries kept returning different data when we kept issuing the same query, and we couldn't really nail down what the root cause was. After restart, it has gone away. But when we restarted, we also went back to a previous version of Metrictank. So then we were not sure if the restart fixed it or the version change. But that's interesting that you see the same thing, because that makes me wonder if there is something broken in the way how the cache adds the chunks, or how it stores the chunks, which allows it to get corrupt.
In our case, it was we actually we had to physically move some machines, which is a very own your own data center problem. From one place in the data center to another place, and Cassandra just ended up being down for longer than the max hints window setting. So when the nodes came back up, the replicas that were on those nodes, which there's only one, because of our rack awareness, had a big gap. And so there was like a 1 in 3 chance of a query hitting that node and coming up for a very particular time range during that move with just a big gap, and then some data on the sides. And then other instances would hit one of the good ones and they'd get all the data for that period. So when we saw this, it was very much a Cassandra problem, and just Metrictank was caching that gap and then would never try to refill it. Because it basically got back from Cassandra 2 data points right next to each other with a big gap between them.
Yeah, so I'm just looking at it, it's the AM key that's used to query it. So it's just the M key in the archive. So this shouldn't be an issue.
Perfect.
I'll need to look at, obviously, locking, because I don't know, some things to look at, but I don't think that'll be a problem. It's queried anyway, normally, right?
Yeah, I guess that makes sense, because the Ccache delete endpoint is basically taking an expression or whatever and then deleting stuff from the cache. So there could be a similar one that.
On another note, so I did work on adding the cache accounting and trying to get more accurate numbers, like, I don't know, a year and something ago. I've noticed a case recently where there must be a bug in there somewhere that I introduced, because there's a case where the number will wrap around and go negative, and then obviously back to the top. And then your cache accounting will look really weird. I don't know if you use the Metrictank dashboard that we have like baked in with that image, but there's a cache accounting chart down towards the bottom, and sometimes it'll wrap around or underflow. So it's kind of interesting.
Yeah.
But not really super high priority, just something to be aware of if it goes to like 16 petabytes, or it's some insane number.
Something that's probably not actually being used.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good one too, though. It's also a good idea. We can add that on there. Yeah, I'm not sure what other information would be useful. So definitely chunk cache would be useful. Index memory index would be useful. I don't know what other live stats would be useful to expose, or operations would be useful other than what already exists.
Would it make sense? So like some of the operational endpoints right now are because Graphite exposes some operational endpoints, and Metrictank is trying to conform with that. Would it make sense to have aliases under the ops or under a similar hierarchy, admin, ops, whatever, for some of these actual state changing functions like delete or even the Ccache delete, which currently exists kind of off on its own and is not a graphite.
So you're talking about like the extensions that we've basically added on top of the regular ones?
Or just like things that aren't necessarily part of what you would expect to be the public facing API, but more for operational use, putting them in the same hierarchy. So you could have like maybe a single rule that just says like, if you're using HA proxy or something like that, basically don't expose this to everybody. This is only allowed from these endpoints or, whatever, these users.
Yeah, that's interesting. I'll have to think about all the use cases. I think part of the problem is, I think a lot of this depends on how you operate Metrictank and what your infrastructure looks like and what your networking looks like. Because obviously, I always think about this from what I know, which is how we run it. But that's not necessarily how everyone runs it. So, yeah, if it's going to go into Metrictank, though, as opposed to, well, it has to go into Metrictank at some point, but then the locks and security around that and exposure are a little bit trickier because basically, if you're running Metrictank in a cluster, or like if you're just running one Metrictank pod, I don't really think it's like a big deal for you. But for anyone actually operating it at any kind of scale, it changes things a bit. I don't know. I definitely need to think about that, but yeah, sure, why not? I'm just going to go down the issue list. Finding interesting things. Oh, I see all the bugs you filed. So that's a good one. There's been a lot of talk about packaging. I don't know if that really relates. I guess it does relate. There has been quite a bit of talk about packaging, though, in the images that we provide of Metrictank, and that they're all basically out of date. So we're working on something with that. I don't exactly know how that's going to shake out yet, but we definitely need to update the images. So then the question is, what's the focus of that? Like, should it be targeting the three cloud providers infrastructure and what's typically used there? Like who's running this? I guess really the question is who's running this on CentOS, or who's running this on Red Hat, on Red Hat or on Ubuntu even. I don't really have a good answer for that. It'd be interesting to be able to get more stats about who's actually using this and information about the environment, but I feel like unless that's voluntarily provided, that we can't just add that in to collect information on people using it. It'd kind of be a violation of trust, I think.
Yeah, I agree. It would definitely be like an opt-in thing.
Yeah. Or maybe we could add a feature that allows you to generate a report or a file, and then you can inspect it and then give an endpoint to submit it to. So there's nothing actually automated about it. That way there's no fear of it communicating back to some hidden server somewhere, right? Because I don't like software like that, personally.
Yeah, I think it is nice to like have usage numbers and be like, because like otherwise you're basically gonna see what you get download numbers or GitHub stars or something like that. You don't really know. You don't really know who's using it, where, why, how, anything like that. It would be nice to be able to to survey people, but then you get the problem of like, how do you broadcast that to people? How do you tell people there's a survey?
Who do you even target? Yeah. I have no idea. Richie, maybe you have some insights onto that. I don't know.
Sorry, I was writing a design doc and just not really listening. If you could repeat the question.
Yeah, no worries. So I was talking about how we could collect usage stats on Metrictank, specifically what OSs people are running it on, or what kind of environments they're running it on, strictly as an opt-in thing. And then Sean mentioned, yeah, maybe we could add like a survey, but how do we even get that out to the right people? Like, who do we target? How does that work?
I think it's a little bit of a chicken and egg, because you don't really have this established community where people really talk to each other. Like, you have users, but you don't even know for sure who the users are and such. So we would probably be using all the Grafana channels of just spreading this information of, hey, this is happening. The other thing which you could attempt doing is basically similar to how Grafana does, that you have a callback function which pings back with information, but I agree that it would need to be opt-in. So this would be a config setting or something like this, which would make it very unlikely that you catch the complete picture, but it can at least give you supporting information. I caught Sean saying that GitHub stars and such are not very reliable, and I would tend to agree. Like, they give you a general idea, but not a specific idea, and especially not about how specifically and very specifically people are using it. Like, it gives you a measure of interest, but not detailed information. All that being said, the only real thing you can do is basically have a survey and spread it as far as you possibly can. So if, for example, you have deb files, but this is obviously time delayed, but if you have deb files, which you provide, those have a news mechanism that if you install the package, that you can surface important stuff to the operator. And the standard tooling of all deb-based systems support handling this. And if you have a headless installation, it at least gets sent to root per local email. If you do an interactive installation and you are in default setting, it gets popped up and you see it in less, and you can read it and confirm it and blah, blah, blah. Well, not confirm it, just read it. So you can also try and use those mechanisms, but none of those give you full coverage. The only thing which gives you full coverage is to basically have a group of people who are already engaged, which again is kind of chicken and egg. But yeah, we can easily use all the Grafana channels to just spread this information, and also make sure that all of us and John and everyone else who has an interest spreads it on their own social media, blah, 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 and basically have a scatter shot. On the plus side, this can be used to also type back, like in the questionnaire, you can write in the header section, by the way, if you have more interest, here is the community call, and here is this public doc where you find more information. So every time we use any of those mechanisms, there should also be a way to find your way into that community. So people who have an interest just can go there and yeah. And then we publish the results. And again, those results will not only be interesting to users and people, they will also be interesting in as much as this will obviously carry a pointer to, hey, here's the community call, here is the mailing list, blah, 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 blah.
Yeah, I think I would like to launch a survey. Not anything too technical to start with, just, hey, do you run Metrictank?
You don't get to run more than one survey, maybe every 2 months, more likely half a year. Mm-hmm. Like, I mean, you can run as many as you want. Like, there's no survey police, but experience has shown you don't want to run more than one in, let's say, 1 or 2 months.
So, that's fine. I think I would just like an initial one without having a bunch of overhead for respondents, right? Something very simple, just to get an idea of how many people are using it, maybe the, I don't know, field they're in.
I think barrier to entry kind of thing, like, have you played with it? Did you end up, if so, like, did you end up actually using it for anything real? And if you see a lot of yes and then no, then you go, okay, but why then, or something like that. You know, how big did you scale it, or how big did you need it, or you know,
What
very
problems?
basic questions, but
Yeah.
nothing like you know, too in detail.
And what issues did you encounter?
Yeah. And then did you and then also some like yeah, like you were saying, like, hey, did you know there are places you can go to get help?
Absolutely, yeah. Like I think probably right at the top of the survey put the details about the community, the Slack channel, the monthly calls, etc.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, can you help me with that, Richie? Or should I?
Sure.
Well, we'll figure that out.
We also have stuff from Cortex, from Prometheus. We can steal from Thanos. Blah 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 blah.
Big fan of that.
Also, most likely, there should be a question about how much data do you even have in this thing if you're using it. Like, is it, and how many instances do you have? So I'm not arguing in favor of having 10,000 questions. I'm just arguing in favor of being very deliberate about what questions are being asked to maximize the actual impact. That was a. I thought input and wanted to say impact. To maximize the impact and the usefulness and actionability of the results, to really make it count and not just basically waste your first shot. And
Yeah,
for example, have an email field, like offer people you can write in your email if you want to talk about those issues, blah, 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 blah. Like make it really count and make it super easy for people to give you the replies which you want. So for example, in the Prometheus survey, you have literally the command which you need to run to put in the result which we want to hear from you, to just make it really, really easy to get this data out and just toss it in. Like you have those 10 minutes during the lunch break and you're just doing this on the side. Make it super simple to get the stuff which you want to get out of it.
Yeah, if we do that, I'd like that to be optional, because what I don't want to do is like, you know.
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
Most of this should be optional.
Yeah, well, everything's so optional. Don't answer it.
Yeah, we have like a big you know, state of DevX survey at Bloomberg that ends up being like 70 pages long, but it starts off, every section is optional. It starts off with a big table of contents for each section, so you can jump to just the things that matter to you. And then even just the sections that people end up filling out is a good data point. Like they see like, you know, oh, 70% of people filled out this section. That means it's relevant to a lot of people, right? Or 2% of people filled out this section, 2% of survey did this. So maybe we don't even need to include it next year in the survey. Maybe we can find a better targeted spot for that. So it ends up being pretty useful just seeing how many people do fill out a survey in the first place.
Yeah, that would be a good indicator also for us, because the goal here is to still get, it's basically to just gather all these people together and have them in one place so that everyone can share knowledge and pain and, I don't know, config stuff, like whatever it is.
I mean, maybe it's a little maybe not the best idea, but maybe a joint survey from Grafana Labs that incorporates a lot of products, including Grafana, you know, Prometheus, Grafana cloud services that people might be using, etc., and just doing a survey on that, again, where each section is completely optional and people can just skip around and skip stuff. And that way, you know, to be honest, Metrictank would be piggybacking on a lot of the other pieces, I think.
Yeah, we do that. We already do piggyback as much as we can. For this one, though, I think, I don't know. We need to, it's hard determining who's using it, because, what's that?
Yeah, sorry, it's not either or, it's both. The fact that Metrictank should piggyback onto as much of what Grafana is doing, or Grafana Labs is doing, is orthogonal from Metrictank doing its own thing. And even if you end up asking exactly the same questions twice, you have two different avenues of asking those questions. So while you obviously will have duplicates, and you might not be fully able to weed out the duplicates, still you get in total more data. So I wouldn't see this as either or, I would see it as both.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, what I might do is open an issue in GitHub to put together a survey.
Yeah, it'd be really
It'll be
cool.
like a list of questions or something. Then we can kind of add to it. And then once we really figure out what the right questions are to ask, I would like to figure out how to blast this out to as many people as possible. I'll do that later. Anyway, that's all I have for today. Does anyone have anything else? Any questions left unanswered? Or anything else we need to discuss? Nope. Okay. Then again, thank you all for coming. And hopefully we'll have more people here next time. It's always the
Thanks,
goal.
everyone.
Every time, just add one more person.
Yeah, I'm gonna add a few people from Bloomberg to my recurring meeting that have done some Metrictank development.
Cool.
Get them in here too.
Oh, that'd be great. Thank you.
Have a good one,
All right.
everybody.
All right, everybody have a good one.
Thank you, people.